My first guest this week is Charles Negy. He is a former associate professor of psychology at the University of Central Florida and the author of White Shaming, Bullying Based on Prejudice, Virtue Signaling, and Ignorance. I say former professor because he was terminated for tweeting a question because we are now a nation of children whose feelings are always hurt. So we talk about that and the problems with progressive racism. Here is the first segment of our interview. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the book. What caused you to write the book, White Shaming, Bullying Based on Prejudice, Virtue Signaling, and Ignorance?
What prompted me to write this book was, ever since I was an adult in college, I've been an advocate for treating everyone equally. And in the 80s, political correctness came on the scene. And in my book, I tried to explain my understanding of how that occurred. And in the 90s, it just picked up more steam. When I say political correctness, I'm referring to the idea that it's not socially acceptable to say anything that's perceived as negative about non-whites, even if what you're saying is accurate based on data. And yet it seems to be acceptable to berate whites. And I perceive that to be a problem. And of course, with the death of George Floyd, it just kicked into overdrive.
So you noticed this problem in the 80s, the problem of political correctness, which is a problem, but I would say is different than what we have going on now. It's morphed into something else. But let's start with the PC culture that you noticed. Would you say that it started, like a lot of bad things, out of good intentions?
Absolutely. And I make that a point in my book in chapter 2. So prior to the 80s, it was common to find literature or discussions about women, and who were leading those discussions or writing those articles? Men. Discussions about minorities. Who's leading those discussions? Whites. Who's writing those articles about minorities and minorities' challenges in society? Whites. So I perceive that in the 80s, these different groups who normally are not allies. Okay, so my opinion, and I can try to defend this if you would like for me to, that on average, Hispanics and Blacks and Asians have never been allies, and Blacks and gays and lesbians have never been allies, and I could go on. But they kind of came together in the 80s because they had a common cause. And that cause was to get whites to stop being the ones defining their lived experiences. And I was on board with that. But the way they went about bringing about change is where I did not like. And that was anyone, let's start with race, anyone, say, who's white, who said anything about African Americans or Hispanics, even if what they said was accurate, they would be pounced upon, labeled as a racist, and people would try to cancel them, essentially. Now, the canceling wasn't as intense as it is today because we didn't have internet, but it was there. That was their goal, to cancel a person, to smear them as a racist. And of course, anyone who said things about women that were unfavorable, even if what they were saying is accurate, they'd be pounced upon as a sexist. Now we call them misogynists. And so that tactic worked. No one likes being called a racist or a sexist. So it worked. Political correctness came on the scene. So alongside with this, all of a sudden, this kind of a silence, never discussing legitimately concerns of minorities or women or gays. But on the side of that, it seemed to be accepted to denigrate and insult whites. And whites just kind of rationalized it, in my opinion, by saying, well, they're minorities, and so it's understood. It's understandable. And I thought, no, this is not, two wrongs don't make a right. And so to answer your question, I know I'm taking too long on that question. I think the origins of political correctness had a good goal, but then they discovered a newfound power and they exploited that newfound power. They being minorities, women, gays, lesbians, etc. That power is threatening to call someone a racist or Islamophobe, transphobe, homophobe, all the phobes.
Well, you said two interesting things I want to talk about there. Mm-hmm. The first thing I want to address is you said that when I asked if it was coming from a place of positive intent, and you affirmed that it was, and you said there was a problem because you had all these people who were not minorities speaking on behalf of minorities in their lived experience. I chuckle because I would argue that in today's discourse, it's the exact same thing. They're just saying different things. Most of the voices, there are some exceptions and people that they pick out to elevate, but most of the voices saying trans people need this, gay people need this, black people need this, Muslims, XYZ, are still white people, right? The loudest voices are, with the exception, I mean, most people will say Kendi and Nicole Hannah-Jones. Outside of that, to go list all the people who are talking about anti-racism and talking about white people needing to get in their place and do the right things. All the people will list will be white, starting with D'Angelo and working their way down. So you still have white people speaking on behalf. It's just that instead of saying, well, these blacks or these gays need to get out of here and they're just, unsavory characters. And I know that because I'm white. Now you have the white people saying, we should believe all black people. Julianne Moore, blacks are all being slaughtered in the streets, right? So you still have it. It's just different whites saying different things. What do you think about that?
There absolutely is this group of people that I call progressives. I don't know what they call themselves, but they call themselves allies. Mm-hmm. They're quote unquote white liberals. They absolutely suck up a lot of the oxygen in the room. Speaking about the lived experiences of minorities, but they're doing it with a different motive in some way. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about whites defining, say, Blacks' lives in the 70s, I'm thinking of people who talk about some problems that were starting to emerge among, I'm going to say, the Black community, which I know is a broad statement, and almost it's not just almost, it is an overgeneralization, but among individuals within the Black community, problems of crime, problems of drug usage, problem of not pursuing education, etc. I thought those were kind of legitimate concerns that any scholar or politician should have the right to address, even if they're not Black. But those individuals were silenced thanks to political correctness. Today's whites that you're referring to, it's almost like they're a different group of whites, in my opinion. Those are the people who are, again, they characterize themselves as liberals, but they're really, it's hard for me to appreciate that they're liberal. They're almost totalitarian. And they rationalize their views and their behaviors by convincing themselves that they're doing something virtuous. So I absolutely agree with you that the people who seem to get a lot of attention in terms of pushing for minorities' rights or trying to define minorities' lives are these white people like D'Angelo. But I just want to let you know there are plenty of minorities, plenty of trans/LGBT folks who are not famous, so I can't drop their names, but they're out there. They're in universities for sure. And I've spent the last 30 years at a university until I was fired last January. I want to assure you that it's not just white progressives who are pushing this agenda that I think is problematic. They have their minority allies out there too, but it may not be as well known as some of the whites.
Coming up, more with Charles Negy, author of White Shaming. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
I just can't remember her name.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Charles Negy, author of White Shaming. And in the last segment, he talked about the rise of PC culture. He was saying that it came from positive intent and people wanting to get voices for minorities out there, not stop letting whites speak for them. And I argued that that is still the case, that is a problem. It's just white liberals speaking for minorities. But it also brought up another issue when he talked about blacks and Hispanics and other groups not being natural allies. And here I make a point about that.
The other thing I was going to say was that you're pointing out that there's not a natural alliance between those groups. And that's what I was going to point out because, and I don't want people to think it means that they don't like each other. It's just that either you're a pro-American melting pot, treat everybody the same, classical liberal. So you're not focused on race because you like treat everybody the same, even if you're Asian, black, or Hispanic. If you are, my group is being treated differently and I want to help that end, whether it's right or wrong, you're not thinking about the other groups. Nobody's going around saying I'm Chinese American, and there's a specific problem in the Chinese American community that I think needs to be addressed. So let me come out and talk about blacks all the time. You just wouldn't do it. It doesn't mean you're anti-black. It just means it has nothing to do with the topic you're talking about. But these new, as you call them, white liberals, these progressive racists, that's what I call them, a kind of gentler racist, they have a different reason why they're doing it. Well, we don't do it because of this, but they're doing the same thing. That want to focus on race all the time, they lead with that. Their biggest, what is one of their mantras? Diversity is our strength. No, I like diversity, but diversity isn't your strength. When you say diversity is our strength, you're saying that it's the number one priority, the be all end all. And if I had a candidate and I'm looking for a technical skill, and instead of hiring the person with the best technical skill, I should look back at my team and say what group is missing and hire a person that fits that group. That's what diversity is our strength means. And that is always going to lead to a problem. It's going to lead to, if nothing else, a weaker team.
I agree with everything you said. And your earlier point, I think, is also worth mentioning again, which is many of us who have these concerns, as I think you and I share so many concerns in common. We have many concerns in common. We see the things a little differently. So I almost think that the people who run around proclaiming that advertising slogan, diversity is our strength, sometimes I cynically think that they're afraid of what the truth is, which is diversity may not be a strength, at least not entirely. So as you already gathered, I've traveled quite a bit, been to Africa a couple times, and the few times I've been to Africa, I've noticed the sub-Saharan countries seem to have a lot of tribes. And when I speak to people about social issues and racial issues in Africa, what I gather is you could take a place like Ghana with over 20 different tribes, if I'm not mistaken, and it seems to be a fairly peaceful country, but all it takes is one little issue and people start quickly dividing and going back to their tribal corners versus them. And sometimes, they resolve it peacefully. In other countries, they go after each other. So I sometimes wonder when I hear people proclaiming that advertising slogan, diversity is our strength, they push it so much. It's like, again, for me, a propaganda that like even they know maybe that diversity has the potential to be very volatile and we might be at odds all the time. And that's the way I perceive us right now in the United States, fighting over every freaking issue across racial lines, gender lines, sexual orientation lines. And how can they run around saying diversity is our strength when it seems like it's causing some problems? Now, I'm not ready to throw away diversity. I think there can be great things that emerge from diversity. I think those things need to be organic and occur naturally, rather than having white liberals impose diversity on everyone.
Yeah. And I think diversity is good too. I just think that when it's forced, like you said, and another weird thing they're doing now, side note, is the diversity is not enough, because the problem is how you approach things. Because they're saying diversity is our strength, that means they love diversity. They're swimming in a bath, warm, comfortable bath of diversity, which means we want more of it. If you like chocolate and it's your favorite thing, you want more chocolate. So they want more diversity. So how do you create more diversity when you hit the diversity ceiling? So you can say, hire more Asians, hire more gays, hire more blacks. That's not enough. It's like a drug. I need more. So now they're breaking up the diversity into subset diversities. You were on the campus. You can see this. I wasn't there. I got common sense. So I know it happens. So you get too many white people out there. We need blacks, and then we need gays. We need Asians. Oh, now we need the Chinese and the Korean and the Indian. Now we need the L and the G and the B to be separate. Now we need black trans. Now we need, Hispanic this, so now you break these groups into further subgroups of diversity, in which case you're increasing the ability and the chances that these people will be at odds, because you can never be one thing to everybody at the same time, always, right? So that's another problem with this diversity is our strength thing, is that it's saying that diversity is so important. A lot of people on the right will say that they want to forego the best and the brightest, which is partially a problem. Doesn't always happen that way, but it could potentially happen. But it's also this, let's create more groups. Let's separate out in order to build together, right? So in order for diversity to be our strength, we need to focus on it all the time. So then we celebrate everything a black person does. We celebrate everything an Asian person does. We say, so we're no longer the United States at that point. We're all of these different subgroup states. And as good as diversity is, because you can learn from different cultures and all that kind of thing, the whole point of the melting pot, as we used to call it when we were younger, is that you brought all these different cultures, different flavors. You could all taste them in the pot, but it was still uniquely American. So a Chinese American brought some of the Chinese culture here, and we took the best of it, but they still approached it in an American vein. So the spine was similar, and everything that fused from it, kind of was the diversity, is what it should have been. Now it's like segmented. It's like, you go to the fine dining restaurant and they do, well, this is a deconstructed red snapper curry. So you got a fresh piece of fish in the middle that's just seasoned with salt. And then you have little piles of the seasonings that come together as curry. They're all separate. So if you eat it separate, it's fine, but you're supposed to somehow take the fish and rake all the ingredients together and it tastes like curry. But they don't want to put the pieces back together anymore. So you don't get curry. You just get a bunch of separate ingredients that taste weird.
I'm going to take every good idea that you just said and present it in a slightly different way.
I like that.
The same idea, though. I think for us to be a cohesive, harmonious country, we need to share some core fundamental values and share a national identity. And each group can bring their best to this national identity, this core set of values. But the notion of multiculturalism, which also came out in the 80s, is this notion that each group ought to be encouraged to partition themselves from the overall country and almost maintain sub-countries. That's probably an overstatement there, within the country. And so I think what I heard you saying, and you correct me if I'm misrepresenting you, that diversity is good when we can bring the best from these groups and make them gel together to foster an overall unified identity and sense of belonging. But when there are groups now, it seems like they actually hate the United States. I mean, I'm not sure why they want to live here, because they seem to hate it. But I wanted to add to what you were saying is about diversity. Unfortunately, and consistent with my book, while the celebration of diversity is happening, there's also this non-celebratory expressions about whites. So we can celebrate, everyone, except when it comes to whites, colonizers, imperialists, slavers, racists, etc. So it's a mess.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
It's a mess. We're in a mess, and I wish I could be optimistic. Right. I just think things are going to get difficult before they might get better. I'm not even promising they might get better.
Coming up, more with Charles Negy, former associate professor of psychology at the University of Central Florida and author of White Shaming. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
Now, more of The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer, with your host, Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Charles Negy, author of White Shaming. And this segment here, we talk about what is becoming a recurring but necessary theme on the show, about how America's bad is compared with the good elsewhere in the world, how people ignore context, and about the bad that actually happens in other countries and the reason why people want to come here, it's as opposed to other places, and that it's okay to say some positive things about America.
In your book, you talk about traveling and some of the things you see and some of the things that happen and the poverty you've seen and the way they approach things, but you'll never hear any of that stuff from the left. So I like the fact that some people are willing to say some good things about America because there are plenty to be said. They're not going to say it. And then those who are opposed to the progressive races tend not to say it because they're too busy being defensive, fending off the, hey, we're not all racist. Let me explain why, and showing the bad examples. But sometimes we need to, pat ourselves on the back and celebrate the good things about America, right?
I'm the first to appreciate the good things of Western culture. Mm-hmm. Free speech, the individual rights, the notion that minorities ought to have rights, freedom to be religious or not to be religious at all. Those are really good things that are missing in lots of the world. But apparently a lot of people in the United States don't understand that because they haven't really experienced the rest of the world. I mean, you don't have to travel the whole world. Just for crying out loud, go spend 6 months in one country, and not a European country. Go to Latin America, go to Africa, go to Asia, even a place like Japan, which is a really nice place, really organized people. If you dig deeper, they just don't like immigrants. They don't really like non-Japanese people. I don't know if you've read my whole book or not, but I was there once and I saw a little group of people protesting, and they had the Brazilian flag. And because that was Latin America, I had to stop and go find out what the protest was about. What I learned was in the 1940s, 30s too, when Japan was heavily embroiled in trying to conquer much of Asia and even willing to attack us in Hawaii, a lot of Japanese people fled. They saw crap was hitting the fan in Japan, and they went to Brazil. Brazil welcomed them. And they had children with Brazilians, and today those children are adults. They're half Japanese, half Brazilian. And because Brazil is always having problems socially and economically, because they have one parent who's a Japanese, they're entitled. They're entitled to go live in Japan. But the problem is they're half-breeds. They view them as half-breeds, and people don't want to give them jobs or rent their places out to them. And they're protesting that, which is just unbelievable that something so obscene in the United States, to be denying people housing or jobs because they're quote-unquote half-breeds, is out in the open in Japan. So these Americans who love seeing all the bad in the United States and seem to know nothing about the rest of the world, because if they did, they would have a broader perspective and appreciate, I think, how wonderful the United States is for most people. They need to get out to, again, they don't have to travel the whole world. Just go pick a country that's non-European
Mm-hmm.
Spend 6 months there and slow down and see what life is like for the typical person in those countries.
Right. It's even a problem if they also need to go to, if that's too much for them, they can go to European countries, because they don't talk about the problems in European countries, even though they attack Western civilization. They just say, America, America, America. And they have no context of reality. To talk about that made me chuckle a bit. You were in El Salvador. You talked about a job posting that was there, and some of the things that the employer was asking for, in the wonderful non-American country.
Okay, so when I lived in El Salvador, there was a mall there, and they happened to have a Sears. And I noticed one day they had a now hiring sign. It was in Spanish, of course. Mm-hmm. Curious to see what they were looking for and who they wanted to hire. And they were describing the potential applicant that they wanted ideally to have a good social presence, a good appearance, and be between the age of, I think it was 18 and 30 or something like that. So, and I was startled because I thought that would never happen in the United States for a department store or any company for that matter. Today, at least, you can't do that. I know we used to do that, say, with airline flight attendants. We used to require them to be attractive. Mm-hmm. But just a department store demanding that you have a good physical appearance and be within a certain age range.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so the thing that I pointed out in my book was Sears, which is I think it's an American company. Mm-hmm. They knew they could never get away with that in the United States, but they also knew they weren't in the United States. They were in a country where racism and age discrimination and discrimination against all kinds of people is totally acceptable. Mm-hmm. It's in most parts of the non-white world.
Yep.
There aren't many rules against racism. I mean, there are some exceptions, but there aren't many compared to here.
Coming up, more with Charles Negy, author of White Shaming. You're listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. I am continuing my conversation with Charles Negy, former professor at the University of Central Florida. I mentioned earlier that he had been canceled for a tweet that he posted, a series of them that were not racist, but were deemed by the new woke administration at the school that they were. And here we talk about that, and he details what led up to it and what happened after his tweet was found by the university.
You were canceled, investigated, and terminated from your position of over 20 years at a University of Central Florida, because people didn't like some things you were saying. And they were really, start off, I don't have them all here, I have one here. It really just seems like a question. Now, I'm a black guy. You were talking about black people. Let's see if this is offensive. It says, this was a tweet. Sincere question. If African Americans as a group had the same behavioral profile as Asian Americans, on average, performing the best academically, having the highest income, committing the lowest crime, etc., would we still be proclaiming systemic racism exists? Now, you can disagree with that. You can say there's nuance. You can say, I get what he's saying, but to say that guy is a racist and must be drummed out of society, it makes you a child, right? I would assume that what you were saying that is that there is racism, but if you're saying it's the system and they can't get ahead, if overnight blacks were getting straight A's and making all this money, it wouldn't negate the fact that there's some whites out there that still don't like them. But because they're successful and they're leading the pack academically or financially, would we still be saying the same thing? It's a question. If I disagree with you, I could just say, no, you're wrong. I don't have to say, no, you're wrong and pack your bags.
I know. It's awful. So what happened from that tweet, and I have some other tweets that are apparently viewed as unacceptable. And I stand by all my tweets, by the way. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, that was on June 3rd, people who seem to be affiliated either formally or informally with Black Lives Matter started bombarding my Twitter account and telling me what a racist I am and I'm going to be fired soon. Then the next day, the university president, who I should add here was just hired at the time, he came specifically with a mission to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. So he didn't bother to ask me can I explain or clarify what my tweets were before he publicly to address a group of mostly Black students on campus who were protesting the very next day. He just went out there and told them that he disagreed with my racist comments. They're vile, they're offensive, they're abhorrent. And him and the provost and the chief diversity officer were saying things like all the students need to lodge racial discrimination complaints against me with the Office of Diversity. My legal team has this on video. And one student, perceived to be an African-American girl, she interrupts the president because he's trying to explain to the group why he can't fire me right today. Mm-hmm. And she interrupts the president and tells the group, he's saying that Professor Negy should have been fired before he got tenure. Tenure is going to make it difficult to fire him. And he looks at her and he says, that's one thing. So he's agreeing with her that I should have been fired before I got tenure. Now, he doesn't know. He doesn't know if any of these complaints at that moment are valid. And yet he's on videotape agreeing with the student that I should have been fired. The chief diversity officer on the same day, June 4th, their investigation of me had not even been going on for 24 hours. Mm-hmm. Talking to a live group of students who are coming into the fall semester, and an African-American student says to him, I'm supposed to go to UCF this fall, but I don't know if I will feel safe on campus with Professor Negy on campus. The chief diversity officer says to him, and this is on video, and we have this, the wheel has started to move, and I'm sure he will be dealt with by the time you get here. So he's sure that I will have been dealt with by the time that student gets on campus in the fall. This is, again, within 24 hours of the scandal erupting. So it's like they already had their minds made up that they're going to try to get rid of me. So all of a sudden, they send out messages on the UCF web post denouncing my tweets as vile and racist and abhorrent.
Yeah, can I read one of the tweets? I have it here, and I wasn't even paying attention to the dates. This is amazing. I didn't realize it was the day after the tweet, so I didn't have time to do an investigation. Now think about it. It's the next day. That's tweet right. That on the 3rd of June, and on the 4th of June, on their official Twitter page, it says, being actively anti-racist means calling out and confronting racist comments. We are aware of Charles Nagy's recent personal Twitter posts, which are completely counter to UCF's values. We are reviewing this matter further while being mindful of the First Amendment. I added the chuckle.
Yeah, I know.
I'm telling the listeners I added it. So.
But if you were to continue reading, I think it goes on and encourages students to use their integrity line to report any professor who they think is making racist comments or engaged in racial discrimination. So they sent that message out on Twitter. The president made a videotape and sent that out. The dean sent a massive email out. The chair of the psychology department sent a massive email out, all condemning me, my racist comments, and encouraging people to lodge complaints about any professor.
Coming up, my final segment with Charles Negy, former professor at the University of Central Florida and author of White Shaming. You are listening to The Charles Love Show on AM 560, The Answer.
The Charles Love Show continues on AM 560, The Answer. Here's Charles Love.
Welcome back. We've reached my final segment with Charles Negy, former associate professor of psychology at the University of Central Florida and author of White Shaming, Bullying Based on Prejudice, Virtue Signaling, and Ignorance. Here, he finishes his story about being canceled for tweets that he made.
So here comes all these complaints. Now, I've taught over 30,000 students. I get really good evaluations with a small percent who don't like my views and they hate my guts. But overall, I get really good evaluations. I've gotten multiple teaching awards. A year and a half ago, I had a job offer to go elsewhere, and the current provost, who was dean at the time, gave me a 12% raise to try to keep me at UCF. And now all of a sudden, they hate my guts. And so they launched this massive investigation into my entire 22-year career, trying to find everything they could. And they think they've come up with these different little things, and they've twisted them to make them worse than what they are. And they think they have found a way to justify firing me. Remember, I'm a tenured professor. So I'm currently, just to let your audience know, I'm currently grieving, which is challenging my firing with the union.
Mm-hmm.
And
how's that go? Is the union supporting you?
Well, this is interesting because the union is very woke, and my local UCF union people would not even respond to my emails asking for help. They just ignored me, and I'm paying dues. So I had to reach out to the main headquarters of our union in Tallahassee, Florida, tell them this is the situation. And so far, they've been very responsive, and they've assigned me an attorney who's a labor attorney, and I think he's very good. So he's going to try to get me reinstated. Of course, who knows what's going to happen.
And if he does, you probably don't want to work there.
Well, I need the income.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They were just really evil about this. Just let you know, as part of our contract, when they're going to fire us, they're supposed to give us 6 months notice and 6 months pay so that we have time to grieve the firing if we want to and have an income. But they said because I represent a threat to the safety of the community, that they were cutting me off from my paycheck within 7 business days. I'm just letting you know and your audience know there's not a shred of evidence in my history of violence, of physical threats or anything, neither.
Well, I think in the new world, it's violent to say, I wonder what would happen if blacks were rich. I think that's violent.
Yeah, well, the students don't feel safe because my ideas, and I'm on campus. So they're just really aggressive with me.
It's just anti-American, but beyond that, nothing you said was aggressive, though. Even if you had, there's still policies and procedures in place with the union and the contract and all that stuff. Even if you had been, but you didn't say blacks should leave campus. You didn't say America would be better if there were no blacks here. You said, I wonder if their performance was great, how people would view systemic racism. Really?
I know.
And people are unsafe.
They're very deceptive. They're telling everyone, University of Central Florida is telling everyone they totally respect my tweets, it's constitutionally protected speech. It's all these other reasons they have discovered in my past.
Well, I appreciate you coming here, and those of you listening, if you can find a way to help him out and send money to his PayPal or do whatever you can do, but we have to speak up for these people who are being canceled for saying words in tweets.
He is Charles Negy, former associate professor of psychology at the University of Central Florida and the author of White Shaming, Bullying Based on Prejudice, Virtue Signaling, and Ignorance. Charles, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. You take care.